Hey everybody, it's Aqil Qadar from Citizen Safety Academy, and I'm here with Ernest Langdon. If you haven't already, go back and take a look at our Assessing Your Target video from our new shooter series, where we talk about what to do when you see the holes on a target and they didn't go where they're supposed to be. Now we're going to talk about how to fix that.
As we mentioned before in the other video, we kind of talked about the reasoning behind some of these issues. In this particular case, we're talking about recoil anticipation. But the question here is, how do we fix these problems? And all of these are very similar when it comes to the actual fix of the problem. The first thing we have to ask is, did you see the sights there when you broke the shot? Because the reality is, if the shots went there, that's where the sights were when you pulled the trigger. A lot of people have a micro-flinch right as they pull the trigger, which is perfectly understandable, right? We've got 35,000 PSI going off in front of our face. It's gonna make you wanna flinch. You kind of have to learn how to deal with that. Keep our eyes open and watch what the gun is doing. Watch what the sights are telling us the gun is doing. Now the question is, look, oh, I've got a micro-flinch. How do I fix that?
Right.
How do I fix that problem? And my answer is going to always go back to dry fire. Dry fire is your friend. Go through proper safety procedures, make sure the gun is unloaded, and make sure you have a safe backstop in case you make a mistake. Always point the gun in a safe direction. But dry firing that gun, handling that gun, pressing the trigger and not seeing the sights move, that's how we learn to assess all of these problems. Once you know what a good sight picture looks like, then the question is, can I learn to press that trigger in a way that doesn't misalign the gun?
So Ernest, you use the term dry fire. What do you mean by dry fire?
Well, that's a really good question. Dry fire is the process of unloading your gun and going through and pressing the trigger with no ammunition in the gun. So where I'm using my actual gun and my actual trigger press and my actual sights to go through these motions to learn how my gun operates, learn what my sights do when the trigger or the hammer falls, and learn how all of that works. You can do draws, you can do reloads with empty magazines, you can do all of these different things and learn to grip the gun and get used and familiar with it. And again, as I said, it's free.
So in that case, you would practice to make sure that whatever you're doing in dry, you also do that same thing on the range when you're doing it live.
100%. Oh. And the two things I would add in there on dry fire is make sure that you're being honest with yourself in dry fire. Were the sights really perfect when I pulled the trigger? Am I really gripping the gun as hard in dry fire as I should in live fire? It's super common. You can get relaxed and not really put the effort into it when we're dry firing. A little quality dry fire is much better than a lot of substandard dry fire. I mean, just give yourself 10 or 15 minutes and just be focused on that instead of trying to say, I'm going to do this for an hour. Because if you start trying to do it for a really long time, you're going to start lapsing in concentration. You're going to start thinking about the grocery list and the other to-do list and all those kind of things. And then we're not really 100% mental focused on what we're doing. And if you keep that focus, that'll increase the learning curve dramatically.
How would you suggest somebody whose fingers, they feel like their fingers are squeezing the gun right before they press the trigger and moving the gun off the target?
So that's what dry fire does. We learn how to isolate this trigger finger from these fingers. Now, if you're gripping the gun nice and firm and then adding in this additional pressure with that left hand, that helps mitigate that. But dry fire teaches us that independent movement of that finger, learning how to isolate it without adding in pressure as we press the trigger.
So if we find that our holes are landing to the 3 o'clock or to the 9 o'clock, or the 9 o'clock in this case, the 3 o'clock, meaning off to the side, what should we do then?
So again, if we're dry firing correctly, we should see the sight jumping over there as the trigger breaks, okay? So what we do is we move our trigger finger in and out, meaning putting it further in or further away so that now when I press that trigger to the rear, the sights don't move. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yes. So you just find where on the trigger, if this was the trigger and this was your finger, where you need to be on that trigger to press the trigger straight back into the frame.
Correct, and everybody's different because different hand sizes, different gun sizes are going to make a difference on what actually is straight to the rear for you and your gun. And dry fire is what teaches us that.
How about we get those high shots? What do you think we can do as far as learning to look through our rear sight instead of looking over it?
So we have to know what the correct sight picture looks like. That's confirmed in live fire, obviously, but knowing exactly what that looks like is very important. So understanding that equal amounts of light between the front and the rear sight, that level top front sight and rear sight, understanding that and knowing what that looks like is very important, and then getting enough repetitions in to see that so that it makes sense to us is very important.
What about those times when people feel like they have the sights lined up just proper, like they have the sights equal light and equal height between the front sight and the rear sight, but they still feel like they missed the target? The shot ended up going low left, let's say.
They're flinching. They're flinching and or anticipating, because that's where the sights were.
That's where the sights were
That's
when
where
the gun went off.
Gun fired.
When you finish your trigger
if you
press.
didn't see it, that means you closed your eyes when you pulled the trigger.
One thing that I've often told new shooters to do is sometimes they can just take the target down and just shoot the gun down range and just try to keep their eyes open and see what that feels like, to try to have their eyes open while the gun is going off. I mean, because it's only natural. If you're holding a firecracker, 2 feet from your face, you're going to flinch at first, and it makes sense. And then after a while, if you keep doing it and your brain says, okay, this thing's, I've got to get used to it. Doesn't hurt or anything like that. And then maybe after a while, you can see that front sight start to move and know where it was when the shot actually went off.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I've heard of other instructors talking about just shooting into the berm, shooting downrange, or shooting at a really, really large target where I'm not really trying to be perfect and I'm getting used to the gun. I don't have to be absolutely precise, and then just seeing what the sights do when the gun fires. And again, as you said, keeping those eyes open and watching and observing what's happening.
Okay, good stuff. So what happens if you think that they're hitting all over and not in one specific place? What do you think? You have a term for that?
Oh yeah, I do have a term for that. I call that anxiety shooting. Okay, meaning I'm aiming in and I should have shot already. I need the gun to go off, and then you pull the trigger just to get the shot done. And a lot of times this happens when we're trying to shoot at some kind of speed. We're trying to do something on a timer, or we're trying to hit a certain cadence, or you feel like, hey, I should have already fired the gun. I just need it to go off. And that one you've got to be very careful of, because then you're learning how to shoot or fire the gun when their sights are not where they're supposed to be. And that is a really bad kind of negative feedback, if you will, where we're learning how to say, it's okay, I'll just make the gun go off. But it's not okay if we haven't actually visually aimed the gun.
I agree. One of the things I often tell new shooters is to slow the process of firing down so they can see sometimes where the wheels went off the road. If you get the gun in front of your face and you touch the trigger, you get the slack out of the trigger and you watch the sights, and then even if at first you slowly press the trigger just to see sometimes where your flinch may come in, that way you know that you have that, and hopefully after a while you can time that out or mitigate and stop moving the gun right before the gun fires.
Yeah. It is a complicated process. We're trying to do a lot of things at the same time. And in the learning process, it's okay to give yourself grace, let yourself slow down, let your mind move around to the different things that you have to focus on, and learn at a pace that's correct for you. So thanks for having me on. Guys, if you're having these types of issues, any of them, go back and look at the video series, figure out what the problem is, figure out how to address it. Take your time, be good to yourself.
Thanks, Ernest. Check the links below for more videos in our beginner shooter series.